Clean keto, dirty keto, lazy keto, strict keto. We hear these terms being tossed around all the time, but what do they really mean and which one should you be doing? We're going to dive into all of these coming up next. So before we get started, you need to know this, that everybody has a different opinion about this, and so if you were to ask 10 people, you're probably going to get 8 to 10 different opinions about it. So I want to share with you a little bit of my thoughts about this subject based on my own experience and research so that you can hopefully make a little bit more of an educated decision about which method you want to choose. First, know that these can be broken down into two main schools of thought. The first is food quality, which is really the types of food that you're eating. The next one's about tracking discipline, which is how stringent are you when it comes to tracking your macros, your nutrients, and calories, and all that kind of stuff. Clean and dirty keto can be broken down into food quality, while strict and lazy keto can be broken down into tracking discipline. Now keep in mind that some of these things can overlap a little bit, but this is just kind of a high-level view of this whole topic. And in some ways, you can actually combine some of these when it comes to food quality and tracking discipline. For example, a person can be clean keto while also doing lazy keto. I'll explain that a little bit more towards the end. Now real quick, before we dive in, I want to ask you to take a second to subscribe to my channel, click on the little bell icon to turn on notifications, and please give this video a like. Let's go ahead and dive in. So when you're thinking about clean keto, you really need to be thinking about food quality. That's really what this comes down to, above and beyond anything else. So we're talking about whole foods, things that are very minimally processed in order to get them onto your plate. We're talking about fresh foods, high quality foods, things like avocados, macadamia nuts, coconut oil, olive oil. We're talking about grass-fed and grass-finished meats and butters. These are going to be your leafy greens, broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus. These can also include some things that others might consider questionable, but as long as they're made from good ingredients or maybe cooked in a high quality oil or something like that are fine, such as bacon that doesn't have nitrates or MSGs or antibiotics or anything like that in it, or chicharrones, pork rinds, things like that are cooked in high quality oils. Obviously, these are things that you ought to watch the quantities of, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to exclude them from a clean keto diet. Clean keto is about eating things that are going to fit into the ketogenic breakdown of macros, right? 70 to 75% fat, 20 to 25% protein, less than 5 grams, less than 20 grams of 20 to 25 grams of carbs a day, but that are of a very, very high quality, fresh, non-processed. Think about this as the outside aisles of your grocery store. If you can stick to those, in most cases, you're going to be fine. Having said that, I think clean keto is something that everybody should strive to follow, especially when it comes to your overall health. Just my opinion, but that's what I would strive to follow if I were you. Moving on to dirty keto, we're also talking about food quality. Dirty keto tends to focus purely around macros, meaning does it fit within my macro breakdown? Then I'm good with it. However, this way of eating typically focuses on a much lower quality of food. This is where we're talking about, fast food, maybe going in and ordering a bunch of burgers without the buns, or a lot of highly processed food that's got tons of ingredients in it, most of which you can't even pronounce. We're talking about things that are GMO, non-organic, things that are highly processed or chemically processed, even to get them into their state which they can present them to you. We're talking about lower quality sweeteners, things that may still show a zero carb, but at the end of the day, if you do your research on them, they're just not that healthy overall. We're talking about diet sodas loaded with aspartame and sucralose and maltitol, and sucralose is one of those ones that can be kind of gray. I don't want to necessarily throw it under the bus, but at least, aspartame and maltitol and a few other ones that are loaded with those types of sweeteners that are overall just not good for you. We're talking about vegetable oils, soy oils, those highly processed canola oils, things like that as well. Other foods that are loaded with nitrates, MSG, and all sorts of other chemicals and things that you just shouldn't want in your body. As you can see, when we talk about eating this way, these are just things that you're going to want to typically avoid putting into your body because they just don't have much to offer when it comes to nutritional value or overall health. Generally, when you hear people like doctors or television shows or whatever, people trashing the ketogenic diet, it's because somewhere, sometime they looked at a study where people were just simply following the dirty keto diet, and that's where they're kind of jumping in and saying, see, this is the most horrible, unhealthy diet in the world. Keep that in mind the next time you want to go dirty keto. Now, one quick note, dirty keto should be avoided, in my opinion, as much as possible, but I will say this, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Sometimes there's just not any other choices. Case in point, my family and I were traveling not too long ago. We were traveling down to San Francisco. We had a really, really early flight in the morning. Too early for me to want to eat breakfast, but by the time we got there, got through TSA, and we're waiting for our flight that ended up being delayed. I just got hungry and wanted to eat. So that what I ended up doing was, and again, this is not something I do often, was run down to McDonald's. I got one of their breakfast platter plates that has the eggs and sausage in it. Gave the other food to the rest of my family, but that was what I ate. Now those are very low quality eggs and very low quality sausage. But at the end of the day, I had to kind of do that if I wanted to stick with my macros and kind of stick to keto. And that's what I'm talking about, is that sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But I want to implore you that that should be the exception and not the rule. So like I said, when it comes to dirty keto, these are just things that, in my opinion, you want to try to avoid. Or if there's some things you just can't avoid, please try to do everything you can to limit them as much as possible. Really, it comes down to this. You don't want to lose a whole bunch of weight and end up being more unhealthy than when you started. Transitioning into strict keto, this is where we start getting into macro tracking. There's a few other little caveats which we'll talk about in a second, but that's generally the overall idea. Strict keto comes down to doing things like this, being very strict and disciplined about tracking all your macros. This also involves weighing all of your food to make sure that the serving sizes are perfect, so that when you plug in your food into, let's say you're tracking food in an application, that you know that you're tracking it appropriately. Speaking of that, it generally involves using an application like Carb Manager or MyFitnessPal or something like that to ensure that as you're tracking your macros, you're seeing exactly what you're putting into your body each and every day. Now, while my personal belief is that you can still call yourself strict keto while doing net carbs, there are some that are more purist than that and would say that to be really strict means to only count total carbs. Now, again, it's just my opinion, and it's probably the opinion of others. I would never, put someone down if they were staying fully clean and as well as going through and measuring and everything else, but still only using net carbs. To me, that's fine, but I'll leave that one up to you. Now, as you can imagine, following strict keto would typically lead to following clean keto. I mean, if you're going to be that hyper vigilant about trying to track everything that you're putting into your body, you probably want to make sure that you're putting the best ingredients into your body. And so sometimes strict and clean go hand in hand, and I highly recommend, if you're going to do that, that's the way you follow it. Now that brings us into lazy keto, and this is also kind of around the tracking style of methodology. But there also is a lot of overlap between both clean and dirty, which I'll get to in just a second. Lazy keto kind of comes down to saying, hey, you know what? I'm not really going to worry about measuring everything that I eat. I'm not going to really worry about measuring every macro that I have. Maybe you're not really worried about the fact that this food doesn't quite fit into the normal keto, macro breakdown, and this may put you a little bit over carbs. It's not that big a deal on lazy keto. This is where you get into kind of somewhat guessing at serving sizes. And this is also around allowing a very wide variety of foods, some which may be clean, some which may be dirty. It just kind of is a mishmash of everything. And depending on your school of thought, when it comes down to lazy keto, a lot of people will say, well, what really classifies it as lazy keto is those that will consider adding a lot extra carbs. So maybe instead of keeping it under 20 to 25 grams of carbs, they're allowing for maybe 50 up to 100 grams of carbs. So in reality, lazy keto is kind of just going with the flow and hoping that you hit your macros and hoping that it still has a good effect on you. Now, I want to point out that you got to keep in mind it is much easier to stall in your weight loss by following the lazy keto way of life. Because you're not measuring, or because you're not maybe sticking purely with a clean diet, you might be more apt to either overeat certain things or eat certain foods that you wouldn't normally eat on a strict keto diet. Some of these things are going to have a detrimental impact to your insulin, which is overall going to have a detrimental impact to your weight loss. You can also stall due to a lack of measuring, which easily leads to overeating, even if you're sticking clean. For example, it's one thing to say, hey, I'm eating clean. It's another to sit down and eat 2 or 3 cups worth of macadamia nuts, which are going to have a huge amount of calories overall. While lazy keto can be defined a lot of different ways, it doesn't necessarily have to be bad or unhealthy. I've done various combinations of this where I typically try to eat clean keto as much as I can. But I used to measure everything to the point where I got to a point where I have a pretty good idea of the serving sizes and things of my meat, so I don't measure all the time, which is a form of lazy keto. But because I measure all the time, I do have a pretty good idea of what I'm looking at. Therefore, it's a little bit more difficult for me to overeat in those things. Having said that, I do go back in and remeasure every once in a while just to make sure that my eyes haven't gotten a little bit bigger in my stomach. Now, I want to be clear about one other thing here, is that I think all of us, no matter how hard we're trying to stick with one particular way or not, I think we all end up in various levels of all 4 of those at some given time during our journey. And if you do, so what? Don't let that get you down. Eating a dirty keto meal every once in a while, because that's what you kind of have to do, not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. Just know that you're not going to make it a regular part of your diet, and then jump right back on the train and keep going. Don't let things like that derail you and kind of get you steered off away from your goals. So I hope that this breakdown gives you a little bit clearer of an idea about what these various types of keto are all about. As I said in the beginning, I really do believe, and I would really try to push anybody that I could towards following clean keto. I think at the end of the day, not only is it going to be better for your weight loss, but it's also going to be better for things like it's going to be better when it comes to inflammation and just overall health. I know I didn't cover everything, but I'd love it if you would drop a comment down below and let me know, hey, which brand of keto are you going to follow? Which methodology are you going to kind of jump onto? Have you tried others and noticed different results with them? I'm sure myself and others would love to hear about your story and your experience as well. I'd also appreciate it if you leave any questions that you have. I do my best to answer those. And as well as the rest of people that are watching, I'm sure they may have some answers for you too. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.